I'm Natalie Bencivenga.
And I'm Tony Norman. And this is In Other News, the podcast that is not afraid to go there.
Where?
Anywhere the story takes us. You concerned about speaking your mind?
Me? Yeah, right. You?
Ha! Let's go, Nat.
Hello, everyone. Hi there, Tony Norman.
Hi there, Natalie.
So, I don't know if you're aware, but this is our very first show.
Yeah. I've heard rumors to that effect.
It's been kind of a long labor of love to get to this point, so I'm maybe feeling overly enthusiastic for the both of us, but I think that's okay.
It is. It's been a long and winding road, as the Beatles said. And just like the Beatles, is going to have a happy ending. Wait a minute. They didn't have a happy ending, did they?
But we will.
We will.
But we are going to have a very happy start.
Yep.
This is our very first show in other news. It's all the news that maybe you should be paying attention to, but God knows there's so much going on. You might have lost something in the shuffle. And we're going to kick things off with hot takes, exploring national topics and then drilling all the way down to local issues. We're going to have guests on to talk even further. We're going to give action items, final thoughts on things. It's going to be jam-packed.
It is. And folks are not don't have any obligation to agree with us.
I like how you're putting a disclaimer already at the top. We haven't even started yet. I love that. You're like, just so you know.
We're just being realistic here. We're very two opinionated journalists and folks here. And while we may agree on a lot of things, we might disagree on some things. And I just want to say in advance that I'm usually right. And I just, am just too gracious a person.
Okay, Tony.
I'm just going to go defer. But yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, this is going to be such a fun episode. It's going to evolve. It's going to evolve with the audience.
Yes.
And we want to hear from you folks about how we're doing and what we can do better. And to make
compliments are always welcome.
Yeah, compliments are welcome. And we expect them.
Appreciate that.
And we expect them. We expect
oh man, I think we've got a diva on our hands right out the gate. I love it. Well, to kick things off, there is so much going on in the news that we could talk about. But something that's really been, I think, weighing on both of us is just seeing how the GOP at the national level is really trying to institute banning of knowledge, right? And one of the most recent situations is happening in Florida where they're blocking AP African American history courses.
I wonder why.
I can't imagine why. And we know Ron DeSantis, who we believe has some aspirations bigger than Florida, is spearheading this movement, so to speak, this anti-woke culture. And I hate how they've co-opted that word. But what are your thoughts on this? Having somebody that you've written about the Black experience here in Pittsburgh, around the nation. I mean, your work is so much centered on the community. So when you saw this, what was your first reaction?
Well, when I heard the quote when Ron DeSantis said that the reason that his administration was objecting to the African American AP course is because it had no educational value, I thought, man, this is a guy with absolutely no sense of the nation's origin, no sense of the people that comprise this great and diverse nation, no sense of what it takes to be the leader of all the people as opposed to a small cult within the GOP. And that does not bode well for 2024 if he is the nominee or even in the race. But before we even get to that, the fact is that this sort of cultural war instinct that he has to always go for the thing that is the most divisive is something that the dumber politicians are only going to copy and emulate, just as Ron DeSantis is copying and emulating the former president, Donald Trump. So it's this sort of cynicism that you just it just makes you ill in the pit of your stomach.
Well, and he even, and I quote, DeSantis said this recently, who would say that an important part of Black history is queer theory? So now he's just pulling it all together, that someone is pushing an agenda on our kids. And so when you see that they have stuff about intersectionality and abolishing our prisons, that's a political agenda.
Right.
Ooh. There's no shame to that statement.
And there's also a shocking lack of self-awareness. I mean, he's saying this, and you would hope that he's so cynical, he knows what he's saying, but I got a feeling that he's just trapped in a loop. He knows what his constituents want to hear. He's just giving it to them, that sort of red meat, and he's hoping it will translate nationally.
Well, and what's interesting too is, as we often see with national topics, they trickle down and they filter into the local conversation. And we've actually been experiencing things in our own backyard. In my hometown of Oakmont, they're dealing with the public school system and certain people on the school board trying to ban books so we can't learn or educate our children around different gender identities. And there's a whole group of people running on a conservative ticket that don't even have children in the school system that have been retired, but are so concerned about learning about how other people live that they're willing to be sort of on a ticket just to stop the idea that a child can't read a book.
Right. It's so appalling because that tactic has never really worked in America. You try to ban ideas, you try to ban books. I mean, the fact is that any child can read any book he or she wants to now anyway, because of the ubiquity of social media and the availability on the internet and so on and so on. So it's already a lost cause, but it is a very potent political tactic. And that's really the realm in which book bannings and, peeing all over curriculum, all that is just symbolic politics. Politics for getting someone elected or transforming a school board. It's symbolic politics. It has nothing to do with real structural change. But still, it's a bad harbinger of things to come in terms of our national and local politics. We don't want to be under the foot of these kinds of characters who would subscribe to this.
Well, and it scares me because these kinds of characters have bought up a lot of media in our cities, and we've seen that now the strike has hit 100 days at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. By the time the show airs, it'll be past 100 days. And, we're seeing things. The Block Communications has bought the Pittsburgh City Paper. Who knows what's going to happen there. And now, of course, the Toledo News Guild, who also is under Block Communications, they've just filed, an unfair labor practice charge against Block Communications. So we're seeing over and over again these players with bad intentions trying to eat up media or come at it from different ways, whether it's banning courses in college, whether it's trying to remove books from public schools, or whether it's controlling the narrative from a journalistic perspective. That's what concerns me is where are the other voices? Where are we all going to go and get our media? Oh, wait, maybe right here.
Oh, no pressure. No pressure.
But it does kind of make me think about, when we set out to do this show almost a year ago now, the world was a little bit different. Yeah. The PG was not on strike. The City Paper was still independently owned. And now I'm really starting to wonder, the importance of independent media. It's going to be that much more intense moving forward for all of us.
Right. And, it seems that when you state it like that, there's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders as folks who are in, independent media. But there's also a lot of weight on the shoulders of the folks who consume independent media. And also, I think there's a burden on our entire democracy, whether you consume independent media or not, to become aware of what's going on. Because freedom is not something anyone should ever take for granted. We've been living in relatively good times since the end of World War II. But the natural flow of things is what happened before World War II. That is what the world is normally like.
Well, my grandmother used to always say the pendulum swings one way and then the other. And just to bring up something else that we read about in Bloomberg, it says that the News Guild CWA, the largest journalists union in the U.S., is asking the Justice Department's Antitrust Division to look into the Block Communications acquisition of the Pittsburgh City Paper, citing potential news market consolidation in the city. So maybe, like my grandmother's right, maybe that pendulum is going to swing back and we're going to see people fighting back against this and using every avenue, including the Justice Department, to do it.
Right. It's very heartening to hear this. It's very heartening to see that the unions are not giving up. The union, at the Toledo Blade and the union at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Every day there's some new revelation about, something that the blocks are doing. And you and I worked for the blocks. I mean, I worked for the blocks for 30 plus years, 34 years, and you were there for almost a decade. And, and we remember the good times and the fellowship with the really great journalists and so forth. And our hearts are broken as we have nothing but sympathy for, our brethren, on the picket lines right now. That's where our hearts are and our allegiance and so forth. But man, every day, every day when these folks stand up for their rights and for the legitimacy of what, and just wanting to have a living wage, we can't help but support that.
Amen to that. And we're going to get into this topic a little bit more in our next segment, The Drill Down, with our guest, Crissy Holtzer. So be sure to stick with us.
All right. You're listening to In Other News.
Thanks for joining us. All right. So we are about to drill down with our very first guest on our very first show. This is a real moment. I want to just take it in. The amazing and wonderful Crissy Holtzer. She is the digital editor of NEXTpittsburgh, and she's going to be working with us and collaborating with us on the editorial process of this show. So it just seemed fitting to have her to talk about the state of media. Dum dum dum.
And it's a real meta moment because she is part of our production process, and she also happens to be an expert on these issues, and so this is perfect. So it's meta, but not the Facebook meta, like meta communication meta. No.
Although we can talk about Facebook too.
That's another day. I think
that's a whole other show, right?
Totally.
So Crissy, you've been working in the digital space for many publications here in the city and around. Can you share with us what you're seeing in terms of how media is really shrinking and what you think that sort of means for the landscape of our democracy?
Yeah, it's crazy. So I've worked with Next, with Pittsburgh Magazine, with WTAE, and then a few other outlets outside of Pittsburgh. And especially with what we've seen with the lawsuit and the strike and the acquisition of City Paper, things are really not looking good if you're looking to diversify where you're getting your news from. So I recommend trying to keep a few local sources that you have in your back pocket that you can really trust. Hopefully Next can be that. But it's really kind of dire out there with trying to find news, especially with everything that's happened with the Post-Gazette over the last even 5 years. It's just been kind of a decline.
For me, I feel like we've been watching almost like a slow motion car crash with what's going on with local media and how people are even consuming their media. We can often end up in sort of these echo chamber experiences, but there's even becoming less chambers to echo in. And so, Tony, from your experience working, as a journalist for decades, we won't get into how old you are, but, when you're thinking about this issue and you're looking at it from decade over decade, when do you think things started to really fall apart for local media?
It's hard not to be solipsistic because, when you've been around as long as I have, you think in terms of epochs as what happened at the Post-Gazette, and you could start to see things falling apart in the early 2000s in terms of PG and local media. There was, at least in terms of local media outside the PG, there was we started to lose lots of small publications, and that's never a good sign. You don't want to see consolidation in a market like this. And at the same time, the PG, as the biggest paper in the area, was also losing a lot of traction in the community. There was a real disinterest in local media all around. We started losing advertising and all of that. And then editorial concerns began to creep into the discussions. So yeah, I would say the early 2000s, things started to go a little haywire and a little crazy. Now they've accelerated to the point where we're questioning whether we're going to have any independent media at all. I mean, as the Post Gazette drifts more and more into a direction that no one wants to see, a newspaper that is trying to kill its union and may succeed, and then impose its own sort of dark vision of the community on a community that will have very few resources or options other than the PG.
Yeah. And where do you think social media plays a role in all of this, Chrissy? Because I know as an elder millennial, as I've been called on TikTok, which is hurtful and offensive, but it's okay.
Elder millennial.
And I'm an elder millennial. That's also for another show. But when we're talking about social media really becoming a part of how not only we consume news, but really our search engines for finding news, Chrissy, what are your thoughts on the role that social media is going to play moving forward? And does it concern you when you hear about these mega billionaires like Elon Musk and even people, and I know it didn't go through, but Kanye West trying to buy Parler and these other platforms, does that concern you as well? Like, who's able to purchase these spaces?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very concerning. And I think just what you said, people do use social media as a search engine, and people use social media oftentimes exclusively to get their news. Especially people my age and younger. So like, I guess younger millennials and Gen Z, they are especially on even Instagram, which you wouldn't think is a news-focused platform at all, and that is where people are getting their news. My friends and I will send news stories or Instagram versions of news stories back and forth to each other all the time. So I think it's really about trying to find a new way to approach the news while not abandoning the old format, but rolling something else new into it to meet those people where they're at. Because if you don't do that, they're not ever going to find you.
Are these stories that you guys swap back and forth, are they shorter? What is it about that characterizes, an Instagram news story as opposed to one that's in the newspaper?
Yeah, typically they're shorter. So one profile that comes to mind is called The Woke Scientist, and she writes the headline on the first slide, and then as you slide through the carousel of posts, there'll be really just copied and pasted paragraphs from what I imagine is a blog post that she wrote. So I would say probably 100 words per slide, and she just divides that up over 10 slides as you slide through. So you don't have to leave the platform of Instagram to get that story. You can just read it and consume it all there. And if you want to go and follow that person elsewhere, you can. But if you want to just consume their media on the platform itself, that's kind of where people are.
It's scary to me because, I do this too. You stay on a platform, you just scroll through, or I'll watch little videos of different people that I like and enjoy. But what always worries about me is this idea of like how this is impacting our mental health, because there is so much news to consume. It's really easy to doom scroll and just lay awake at night and be like, oh my God, the world's on fire. The world's really on fire. Oh my God, this, and you feel this real sense of helplessness. And I think what we're trying to do with this show within Other News is provide people with actionable items that they're going to be able to engage with following every show. Because for me, it's like, it's not enough to just get all worked up at 4 a.m., but it would be nice if I knew, I can go to the Next Pittsburgh website, and under where the show's embedded, there's 3 links. Here's how I register to vote. Here's how I sign this petition, or here's just like more information on this topic to deepen my understanding. Because I think what's happening too is we're all experts about nothing at this point, right?
Right.
So I think there is something to be said for using journalism as a way to create and build community, and a way to create and build equity. And I think that's really something that's missing from the larger landscape.
Right, because that kind of journalism has been called advocacy journalism in the past, and it's taken upon it a certain stink when the establishment gets a whiff of it. It's like, oh no, we're just objective, and what you're talking about is beyond our purview. Is beyond the purview of legitimate journalism. And so legitimate journalism, as we've known it, is becoming less and less relevant to the real world.
Yeah.
And so we need to find a new paradigm. And I think social media, as earlier I talked about, the early 2000s being the time that I started to feel, really, really like something is going on here. But it also coincided with the time of the rise of social media, the rise of Facebook, with the rise of all of these sites that were independent of newspapers and newspaper input. So, so here we are, more than a decade later.
Yeah, here we are. And I don't want to miss the point that I really think there is a clear connection between the rise of fascism and the decline of a free press as well in our communities, because as we're seeing, with this sort of delegitimization, I don't know if I just made that word up, but we're going to go with it.
Heard it.
Thank you, Crissy. With sort of like delegitimizing, journalists and discrediting them and saying fake news and creating a real space for sort of charlatans to sort of take hold. It is very concerning when you think of how AI is also playing a role in this, because we're seeing now more articles being generated by computers, which I think further diminishes the impact and the importance of the work of journalists. I mean, what do you think, Tony?
Well, I mean, I'm scared. I'm
That's
absolutely
fair.
I'm absolutely intimidated by the potential of AI to just sort of work its way into mainstream journalism, whether it's newspapers or even on social media, where it could do a lot of damage. Yeah. So you don't have to. I mean, I'm already doom scrolling that stuff.
Oh. Well, what I love about Next Pittsburgh is there's not a lot to doom scroll on that site. There's a lot of fun, beautiful things to engage with, places to go, people to know, and of course, lists on top 10 restaurants and all the good things that we can't ignore or negate. So, Crissy, as we wrap this up, would you just like to share any final thoughts you have on why you love this work and what keeps you in this game, knowing how challenging it is to be part of this landscape?
Yeah, I like to just try and stay positive in a way that feels real to me. So I think some people, when they say stay positive, they kind of mean like stick their head in the sand and pretend like things aren't happening. The world isn't on fire when we all know that it is. Right. So I don't think that's a realistic approach. And I think that's just going to end up being more detrimental in the long run. But you just have to try and take that and take the good. And like you said, find something that you can do to make a difference and become more educated. And I feel like Next Pittsburgh can kind of be the place for folks to do that.
I love that. And we love you, Crissy. And thank you so much for being our very first guest on In Other News. And we hope you'll come back and hang out with us again soon.
Oh, absolutely.
She has no choice.
She has no choice.
She has no choice. We shouldn't pretend that she has any choice.
You always have a choice, Crissy.
I would love to return.
Wonderful. Well, we'd love to have you again. So, yeah, thank you so much, and we'll be back shortly. You're listening to In Other News.
Thanks for tuning in.
Well, that was wonderful. I just love talking to Crissy.
She's good people. She's good people, and the whole braid little thing she had in her hair and so forth.
She was very excited to get dressed for the show today and be a part of it. So we always appreciate, when someone goes the extra mile. But, part of this show that we touched on a little bit during that segment was the idea of actionable steps and items. And of course, we want to share with people, where you can go to do things after you hear about these topics. But the one thing I really want to make sure that we plug in this very first episode is how can people read more about what you're working on at Next Pittsburgh? Can you share a little bit and tell us about your column? Because I don't even know if some people know you're at Next Pittsburgh.
Right. Yeah. Well, folks who know me, have been reading me since 1996 at least, when I became a general interest columnist, are probably wondering, what happened to that column? Well, in August, I moved to Next Pittsburgh. And so my column appears weekly, usually on Mondays, at Next Pittsburgh. Just go to the website. And it's generally about things that are happening in the African-American community. It's profiles of prominent and not so prominent folks. Yeah. It's also about, political and social situations there. So it's a fairly young column. It's brief, probably more than just a little over half the size of my previous columns. But I'm trying to pack a lot into it, and I'm having a lot of fun.
Well, I'm loving reading it. I love the fresh takes that you're bringing and the different perspective. And I'm hoping that this show, we can be an extension of some of the great work that you're sharing, in your column. And, for me, I'm really looking forward to having conversations that are uncomfortable, that are important, and that have impact. And so I am so excited to go on this journey with you and within other news and our great team that's been behind the scenes helping us. And so I'm just really grateful. And wow, we got through our first show. High five, Tony.
All right.
We'll see you guys next time.
This has been fun. Surprisingly fun.
In Other News is a presentation of Next Pittsburgh and is proudly produced by us, along with our amazing team, Emma Honcharski and Margie Ruttenberg. Our editor is Sorgatron Media and original music by Jack Swing.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please like and share this episode and rate and review us wherever you're listening. It really helps us grow. And if you're listening on the Next Pittsburgh website, take a minute to take a look around to learn more about all the cool stuff happening in our hometown.